Daniels here. Um, from time to time I run into those time crunches and I don't get to put things on my blog that I'd like to because it takes a little discipline to write. So I'm going to be very undisciplined now, and I'm going to do a video blog because I wanted to get information out to you, to as many people who might take a look at this, about my buddy Steve Sjogren's new book. It's called Heaven's Lessons, and the subtitle is 10 Things I Learned About God When I Was Dead, or When I Died. A few years ago, Steve wrote a book called The Day I Died, and it recounted his near-death experience. Actually, I guess, he was technically dead for a period of time. Back in 1997, I'd gotten to know Steve 3 or 4 years before that, so we've known each other close to 20 years. We served in congregations in the Cincinnati area. He a very big one, me a little teeny tiny one. But Steve is a great guy, and he went through this terrible experience. He went in for gallbladder surgery, and his aorta was punctured, and it led to all kinds of problems, the first one being that he died. And there was a long period of rehabilitation, and he still physically walks with a limp. And as he talks about in this book, he also has some limps as a result of this experience. This book reads like a conversation with Steve. His reflections on what he's learned as a result of that experience. The thing I like about it is he doesn't dwell on that experience. He dwells on the things that he learned as a result of that experience and the different ways in which he looks at life now because of that experience. And he goes through these 10 lessons that he's learned. And he does it in a very accessible way, not preachy. You wouldn't know that this guy is a wonderful, wonderful preacher. He's just a man of faith talking about how his life was transformed as a result of his encounter with God. Not a direct visual encounter, but a sense of God in that time frame, in that operating room when he was dead. And I'll just read some of the chapter titles to you. He says, first of all, we live in a spiritual world. We become kind of jaded in our time and cynical. It's a post-scientific era in which people don't have much to do with science and don't have much credibility that they invest in science, and yet we are also out of kilter with the realities that generations have been aware of, that there is something more than this world, and that if we will tune in, God is ready to talk with us. He'll never do that in a way that's inconsistent with Scripture, because that is the ultimate self-disclosure of God. But this is a good reminder. He talks about how big God is. God is big. Success works backwards. Looking for success in this world, looking for the self, is not the way to go. That real life comes from the giving of self, which of course is a big theme in Jesus' ministry, and he went all the way to the cross in pursuit of what was best for us, not himself. God especially enjoys irregular people. I like that because I am an irregular people. But it talks about the importance of being open to people that others might deem just not quite mainstream, to be open to them and to be able to show them the grace of God. Don't fear death. Quit quitting. When you know how the story's going to end, there's no reason to quit. You know that on the other side of every victory and every defeat in life, there is God, stronger and bigger than you are. He really does a good job explaining that. God heals gradually. I think that's true. Get over it. Steve talks very honestly about experiences that would embitter most people, and how he's had to work through those things. and learn to see things from others' perspective. And he not only talks about the Bible in this case, but he also talks about the help that he received from a counselor in trying to see other people's perspective. Because what happened was when Steve was pastor of a very large congregation which he had founded in the Cincinnati area, a tremendous congregation. And while he was gone, the congregation moved on with its life. And it became clear that maybe Steve wasn't part of its future plans. And he had to deal with that. And in fact, what he says at the end of that chapter is really very good. Quit quitting. I'm not sorry, Get Over It. At the end of Get Over It, what he says is very good. In fact, I quoted it on my blog a few days ago. You can read it if you go down further on the page. But what he says at the end is worth listening to and savoring. I'll get there. One final thought I want to leave with you as we close this chapter. Forgiveness doesn't necessarily mean trust. So if you're a person who has been physically, sexually, emotionally abused by another person, you can forgive. You know, the Greek word for forgiveness, which is used by Jesus in the New Testament, is aphiemi, which has the meaning of release. And when we forgive, we not only release the other person from their debt to us, but we release ourselves from the imprisonment of animosity and resentment and grudge holding. Not a very productive thing. But anyway, I'll read this. One final thought I want to leave with you as we close this chapter. Forgiveness does not necessarily mean trust. When we were elementary school kids at recess, some kids just couldn't keep their hands to themselves. Newsflash, it doesn't get any better when we grow up. You'll find the same kinds of people in your adult life. They may even be bullies who are dangerous to you. Avoid them, at least until they learn to play nice. If you have done all you can to make peace on the playground, there comes a time to choose to get off the teeter-totter. Forgive them, sure, but you don't have to trust them. It may be time to move on to a safer playground. I think that's great advice. Then he goes on in chapter 9 and talks about facing your fear and finally to be thankful. There is no room for those kinds of resentments or fears or any of that other stuff when you focus on being thankful to God for your blessings, most especially for the gift of Christ. Now, this book, Heaven's Lessons, would be an ideal book for you to give to someone who is not a Christian, because what it does is it tells the honest struggling, I guess, wrestling of a Christian man with all of the blowback from what was really a horrible experience. When I went to see Steve at the hospital several different times when he was hospitalized, I know the first 2 times he didn't even know I was there. I mean, he talked with me, but I'm sure he doesn't even remember those first few visits. And to have had the experiences that he had immediately following that could have driven some people far from God, far from any sense of hope, far from a sense of humor, far from wanting to be in relationship with people. Steve wrestled with that stuff, as anyone would, but he's come out on the other side, and he is a faithful servant. He's a person I admire very much. I've had several mentors in pastoral ministry over the years. One of them was a man in my first parish who was a pastor from a neighboring congregation. Wonderful guy, Ron Clausen. Pastor Bruce Shine was one of my professors, professor of New Testament at seminary. Steve Sjogren, though he's 2 years younger than me, is a lot wiser than I am, and he and Janie are real treasures, and they pray with power because they pray with humility. And that's part of what comes across in this book. This guy is humble, he's a servant, he's clay in the hands of God, and he's got a great sense of humor. And he has got more brain synapses connecting things than any other human being I've ever met. He's absolutely brilliant, but he doesn't think so. And that's part of what makes this book great. So I really, really do hope that you will click the link down below this video and purchase Heaven's Lessons by Steve Sjogren. It's also available, of course, in ebook form, as you'd expect from a guy who's so geeky over electronics as Steve is. So get this book. It will bless you, but more important, buy it for someone else. It could change their lives. Thanks. God bless.